Good morning. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study for today, the 6th day of May 2018. My name is Kurt Bell. I am your host. I'm a non-believer, and though I enjoy reading the Bible and all other histories and mythologies, I'm not a believer of the supernatural bits. So I'm going to read this chapter. I've read it already, and we're going to talk about it now, kind of relate the chapter to you as I remember it. And in this way, kind of help to flesh out the details. But first, I just realized I left my receipt there. So let me motor over close to the fuel thing here and grab the receipt. Stuff that's in my pocket real quick. So we're on Genesis book. Oh, by the way, I do this every day, so Monday through Friday. Lately, I've had a little bit of a hard time. It seems like things have conspired to make it difficult to do, or have required more than one day to do it. But hopefully this week we'll be back on track. This is Genesis 41. And in this chapter, Joseph, who is the current hero of the day, is still in Egypt and still a prisoner in the... well, no, we don't know that he's still a prisoner. He's still, he's a prisoner insofar that he's a slave of the Pharaoh's chief of the guards down there in Egypt land. Remember, he was sold into slavery by his brothers. And in Genesis 41, Joseph foretells the liberation and the hanging of the Pharaoh's butler and baker, respectively. And you may remember that in that chapter he asked the butler, who would be liberated and replaced back to his position at Pharaoh's side, to remember him when that happens. But the butler did forget. And of course the baker, having been hung and or impaled, King James indicates that he was hung. New International Version indicates that he was impaled after being beheaded. Well, in both cases he was beheaded, and then either his body was hung or impaled. Either case, the posthumous injuries were implied as a disgrace to his body, not as a punishment in itself because he was dead. But anyway, that man has no more recourse to anybody except in heaven or hell. Well, there is no heaven or hell yet at this point in the Bible. So anyway, so Joseph is down there in the household of the captain of the guards. We don't know if he's still in that little prison in the captain's household. Remember, because he was thrown in prison because the captain of the guard's wife made up a story that Joseph had come on to him, which wasn't true. So 2 years have passed since the butler was restored to his place, and lo and behold, the Pharaoh has a dream, or two dreams actually, which no one can interpret. The first dream is that he dreams of 7 cows, fat and well-fed, very healthy-looking animals coming out of the Nile. Maybe they've been kind of grazing or drinking in the Nile, where they come stepping up out of the Nile. And following shortly thereafter are 7 more cows, but these are not fat and healthy, but these are lean and hungry, starving cows, not in very good shape at all. And a curious thing, the 7 lean, hungry, and starving cows consume the 7 healthy cows right there on the spot. That's the first dream. And then the cows don't look any better for the lean and hungry cows don't look any better for the eating of the healthy cows. So that's the first night. And then we don't know if it's the next night, but soon thereafter, Pharaoh sleeps again and has another dream. And in this dream, 7 stalks of wheat are shown healthy and rich and just burgeoning over with goodness. But kind of stuff you'd find in a very good harvest. He sees those. And shortly following those, and I think those come out of the river too, does it? Or does it grow out of the river? And then shortly following that, in the same dream, is 7 lean stalks of wheat, blasted, as it says in the Bible, blasted by the east wind, withered, and good for nothing but chaff. And somehow the 7 withered stalks consume the 7 healthy stalks. I'm not sure exactly how wheat consumes wheat, but it does. And it appears the 7 withered ones appear no better for that effort either. And when Pharaoh wakes up, he realizes he's had another dream, and he's quite distressed. So he calls for all of the wizards and magicians and all the holy men of the realm, and brings them in. And it's interesting because we're talking about Pharaoh being the king of Egypt, but I learned through a little study that the word Pharaoh didn't mean king until about 1500 BC, and these events, if you believe historical estimates, took some place in the early to mid second millennium. So we're about 1200 to 1500 years away from the term Pharaoh meaning king. But anyway, so Pharaoh, as the word is used, maybe it's one of those things that's lost in the millennia of translation. Pharaoh calls all of the wise men and magicians and the like, and guess what? None of them can interpret the dream. Really? None of them? None of them even take a stab? Well, if God's at work here, maybe that's why. And so Pharaoh's quite upset because he thinks that there's some meaning here. And that's when the butler, remember him? He was the one that was restored to his place through Joseph's interpretation of the butler's dream. Remember, the butler dreamed that he had three things of grapes, and that the grapes he squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup and gave it to Pharaoh, and that meant that he would be returned to Pharaoh's side. And sure enough, it happened according to the story. And he remembers that he tells Pharaoh, he says, "Oh, I just remembered, I've been bad. I forgot my duty." And then remember, his duty was that in return for the good prophecy that Joseph gave the butler, that the butler was to remember Joseph to Pharaoh so that he might help Joseph out of his bondage. Because he says, I was, sold into slavery unjustly and brought out of the land of Canaan. And now the butler remembers, and he tells Pharaoh, because I guess he's just standing there right next to him. He's the cupbearer after all. Cupbearer or butler are one and the same, apparently. And he says, you know what, I just remembered, there was a guy in prison. Remember a couple of years back, you threw myself and the baker into prison, and there was a man in there. He was a Hebrew, a servant of the captain of the guard, who could foretell dreams, who could interpret dreams. And he interpreted that I would be returned to my place, and that the baker would be impaled. It's literally what it says in the King James edition. Never mind about the beheading, just straight to the impaling. And he says, he accurately foretold our dreams. So hearing this, Pharaoh then summons Joseph to him, saying, bring that man here. So, but before he can come unto Pharaoh, he has to be cleaned up and shaven. So we don't know the extent of the shaving. Was it a pretty thorough shaving, or just the head, or just the face, or whatnot? But anyway, he's cleaned up, shaven, and given a nice change of clothes, and brought before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, I brought you here because I heard that you can foretell dreams. And he then goes ahead and he relates the two dreams to Joseph in exactly the same way that I just did again. And because he relates it twice, I'm going to relate it twice again too. So I'll relate it as well twice. So the second time, so Pharaoh says directly to Joseph, and he's actually communicating the dream directly. He didn't rely on anybody else to do it. Pharaoh did it himself. And again, Pharaoh should mean at this point in Egyptian history, should mean like a great man or a strong man, not a regional lord, kind of like maybe almost like a mafia don, not a king, but is being used that way to describe the king. So he's either the king of Egypt, or he is just a very strong, powerful person. And I'm inclined to think he's actually the king of Egypt, because what's going to come next after this. So it's interesting how that use of the word Pharaoh got changed and it got applied perhaps incorrectly. So he says, Pharaoh says to Joseph, I dreamed of 7 fat and healthy cows coming out of the river, followed by 7 lean and sickly cows, which then did devour the fat and healthy cows. Then I had another dream in which 7 stalks of wheat came out of the river, followed by 7 weakened and unhealthy stalks of wheat, blasted by the east wind, useless then for anything, which did consume the first 7 stalks. Joseph then turns to Joseph, when he hears that Pharaoh tell him that he thinks that he's heard that he can answer dreams, Joseph, and this is important, Joseph says, it's not me, it's the Lord that will interpret your dream, because that's the exact same thing that he said to the baker and the butler as well. So he's not taking credit, which resulted in a tweet on my part that it appears that in Genesis 40 and 41 tell us that God will communicate to humanity directly via dreams, and that this will work as long as the dreamer is doing so in the name of God. So now you would think that there'd be all kinds of opportunities for marketed mischief if this is the case. You know, people claiming that they're interpreting dreams on God's behalf, and I don't see that. But and doesn't this sound a little bit like sorcery or witchcraft? I'm not so sure. So anyway, so Joseph says, I can do it, but it's not me, it's God, it's the Lord that's doing this. So then he goes ahead and he interprets the dream. He says, these dreams are the same thing. You're being told by God the same thing 2 times. And what you're being told is that in for the coming 7 years, you're going to have feasts. And I mean, you're going to have plenty in the land of Egypt, all over the place. You're going to have 7 good years, and great harvests are going to come in, followed by 7 bad years. And that what you need to do is to take up 1/5 of everything in the good years and lay that aside in storage against the coming famine. And that way you'll be able to that way you'll be able to save Egypt from the famine that's coming. Very simple interpretation, right? Of course, it's God's interpretation. Well, Pharaoh jumps right on this, and he's ready to change his administrative hierarchy in a moment. He says, basically, who do I have among my administration that I can trust? Oh, and furthermore, Joseph says, you must find someone who's worthy to administer your affairs in such a way that that 1/5 of the harvest in the good years is set aside into granaries in the cities, and then when the lean years come, that person can then administer and dispense those grains to the people so that they won't starve. So Pharaoh jumps on this right away and says to everybody, his counselors, who among us can do this? Who is worthy and virtuous and has God's favor that could be this administrator? And, you know, without even really getting an answer from his administrative officials, Pharaoh jumps to his own conclusion that Joseph's the guy. And he turns to Joseph and says, you Joseph, you've clearly demonstrated through your ability to interpret this dream, which, footnote, hasn't been verified in any way other than forecast. You are clearly the one. So I'm going to make you, Joseph, my number 2 man in Egypt. I'm going to give you a house. I'll give you a wife. Well, he doesn't say that, but he does this in a minute. I'm going to give you a chariot and fine clothes, and send runners before your chariot to call out, make way for not for the king, but for the number 2. Make way for the number 2. And your job will be to travel the land and make sure that what you just said actually happens. He basically giving Joseph his number 2 administrative capability and responsibility over Egypt. Now, so the scholarship that I read indicated that probably wasn't, it probably would be inaccurate to call think of Joseph as like this, the vice king or the vice pharaoh, because what was probably more like was a corporate structure with a CEO, with a president, and then multiple vice presidents, right? So vice president of finance, vice president of operations, vice president of technology, all those types of things. And that Joseph was simply one of those vice presidents, and who has responsibility, overarching authority over his particular area of control, which would be the collection and storage and distribution of food on the 7 good and 7 lean years. And then also, but also he would be responsible for that as it affects the kingdom in general. But other vice presidents, also other people in his position for other parts of the kingdom would have their responsibility. So, second in command of Egypt, kind of, sort of, just as much as a vice president might be second in command of a corporation, kind of. So Joseph then begins that life. Oh, and he gives the Pharaoh, the king, or the strong man, gives Joseph a wife. And this is the daughter of a high priestess. Can't remember her name, and I can't remember the priest's name, who is Joseph's new father-in-law. But they're kind of complicated names. But she bears 2 sons unto Joseph. And I do remember, I think the first son's name was Manasseh, and the other one, Ephraim. That's right. I think it was Ephraim. Manasseh. Wow, out of nowhere that came. Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh because Joseph named his first son by this priest's daughter, Manasseh, because Manasseh made him forget his troubles in Canaan and his past life. And Ephraim, no, I don't think any particular reason is given for his name. But, second sons, right? So Joseph's in a good state, right? He's got himself a job, he's got himself a chariot, he's got himself a chariot collar saying, "Yeah, make way for number 2." He's got himself a haughty wife from with connected, kind of with the priestess, with the priest. He's got himself 2 sons, and things are looking good. Now things turn out just as Joseph predicted, or as he was told by God. The 7 good years do come. Joseph works hard to set aside the 1/5 of the grain into the granaries in the cities to be for safekeeping. And then I think it ends then. Does it end then? With the start of the 7 bad years. And the people, not just in Egypt, but in all of the countries, begin to suffer. That is when Pharaoh instructs Joseph to open the granaries and begin selling the grain to the people that they will survive. That sets the stage for Genesis 42 and a reunion with between Joseph and his brothers. And also, just a footnote as well, I did tweet that the fact that of what was going on here in Genesis 41 made me believe that God may be a socialist. kind of a provocative thing to say, and I did say so on Facebook and got quite a few responses. Most of them are the typical responses. Socialism doesn't work. Every socialist system reverts back to capitalism. That kind of stuff, which kind of misses the point. The point simply was that God was guiding Pharaoh through Joseph towards a social welfare system that would protect the people in times of difficulty. And even though that wasn't just it wasn't an entitlements program, the grain was sold back to them, probably at a profit for Pharaoh. Nevertheless, that is indeed a system of social works and social welfare. It's a safety net. So that is nothing less than a bit of social engineering on the part of God. Very interesting. I think I'll remember that for future reference with regard to my interest in socialism, because I am a socialist. I'm a social democrat, so I like democracy, but I also believe that we can make a better society through social efforts rather than relying on individuals alone. So that's it. I will leave off there, and thank you all for joining me today for this episode of Freeway Bible Study. Until tomorrow. See you. Bye-bye.